The morning I found out I owned the company, I was eating a granola bar over the sink because I hadn't had time to sit down for a meal in 3 days. That's the part nobody talks about. Everyone imagines some dramatic boardroom moment, some cinematic reveal with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lawyer sliding a folder across a mahogany table. Maybe that's how it works for other people. For me, it was a Tuesday in October, crumbs falling into the drain, my phone buzzing with a calendar reminder I'd set for a meeting I was already late to. A meeting, by the way, that my supervisor had scheduled specifically to discuss whether my attitude was becoming a problem. My name is irrelevant to most of the people in this story. At Caldwell Property Group, I was just the new analyst in the acquisitions department. Badge number 1147. The girl who brought her lunch in a reusable container and took the stairs because the elevator made her anxious. I had been there 11 months. My father had built the company from nothing, a single row of rental properties in Charlotte, North Carolina, 32 years ago. By the time I was born, it had become something else entirely. Regional headquarters, a portfolio worth hundreds of millions, his name on the building. I grew up watching him leave before sunrise and come home after I was already in bed, and I told myself I understood what sacrifice looked like, even when I was 7 years old eating cereal for dinner, because my mother was too tired to cook. What I didn't understand until much later was why he had enrolled me in that company under a different last name. My mother had gone back to her maiden name after their divorce. I was 12. When I turned 23 and needed a job, really needed one, the kind of needing that comes with student loan statements and a lease renewal you can't afford, my father made an offer. Come work at Caldwell, learn the business from the ground up, but do it the right way. Do it without anyone knowing who you are. You'll never know if you earned it otherwise, he told me. We were sitting in his car outside a Panera Bread in South Charlotte because neither of us wanted to be seen together somewhere. His employees might recognize him. If they know you're my daughter, every promotion, every good review, every handshake, you'll wonder. I know you will, because I would. I hated that he was right, so I took the job as Mara Sinclair. My mother's name, my real name, technically. I'd never legally changed it. I wore it like a costume every morning when I walked through those glass doors, smiled at the security desk, and pretended I hadn't grown up hearing my father take calls about this very building at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings. For 11 months, I was nobody. And honestly, I was okay with that. The man who tried to have me fired showed up in September. His name was Beckett, and that's the only name I'll use because I refuse to give him the dignity of a full one. He walked into the acquisitions bullpen on a Wednesday morning like he was stepping onto a stage. Navy blazer, no tie, the kind of casual confidence that comes from never once worrying about a rent payment. He was maybe 30, maybe a little older, with the sort of jaw that photographs well and tells you absolutely nothing about character. Within an hour, everyone knew he was the CEO's son. Within 2 hours, I knew he was lying. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was small things, the kind you only notice if you've spent your whole life paying attention to a person from a distance. He mispronounced our CFO's last name, a name my father had mentioned 100 times, a man who had been with the company for 19 years. He didn't know the address of the original Charlotte property. When someone mentioned the annual retreat my father hosted every spring at Lake Norman, Beckett nodded slowly and said, "Right, the mountain thing. Lake Norman is a lake." My father has corrected people about that distinction my entire life. None of that would have mattered, except that Beckett seemed to understand very quickly that I was watching him. I don't know what gave me away. Maybe I asked one too many questions in the meeting, where he announced a new efficiency initiative that would reorganize the acquisitions team. Maybe I didn't look sufficiently impressed when he dropped the name my father into every third sentence. Whatever it was, I became a problem to him within 2 weeks of his arrival. It started with my assignments. Work I had been leading got quietly reassigned to other analysts. My name disappeared from a client presentation I had spent 3 weeks building, replaced with someone else's, someone who had barely touched the file. When I brought it up to my supervisor, she gave me the kind of look that meant she'd already been spoken to. "Beckett has asked us to restructure how we credit team projects," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's more of a collaborative model now." Collaborative, right. Then came the performance review. My first one had been excellent. I still had the printout, tucked in the back of a notebook in my apartment. This one arrived in my inbox on a Thursday afternoon, and I sat at my desk and read it 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Resistant to feedback. Struggles with team dynamics. may not be a cultural fit for the direction of the department. I had never once been told any of this to my face. I called my best friend that night. We'd known each other since college. She was the only person outside my family who knew the truth about who I was. I sat on my kitchen floor because sometimes that's just where you end up. And I read her the review out loud. "He's building a paper trail," she said immediately. "She works in HR at a logistics company in Raleigh. She knows how this works. He's setting up a termination. Someone told him to get rid of you and he's doing it the clean way. Why would anyone tell him to get rid of me? I'm nobody to him." She was quiet for a second. "Are you sure you're nobody to him?" I didn't sleep that night. I thought about calling my father. I almost did. I had my phone in my hand at 2 a.m, his contact pulled up, thumb hovering. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. Or some part of me that needed to understand what was actually happening before I asked anyone to fix it. So instead, I started paying attention in a different way. Beckett had an executive assistant, a woman named Phyllis who had been with Caldwell Property Group for 14 years. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's coffee order and never said anything unnecessary. But she also, I noticed, got a certain tight look around her mouth whenever Beckett spoke in meetings. The look of someone who knows a thing and has decided, for now, to keep it. I asked her to lunch. Nothing formal. I caught her at the coffee station on a Friday and said I'd heard there was a good sandwich place 2 blocks over and did she want to get out of the office for an hour. She looked at me for a moment, assessing, and then she said yes. We didn't talk about Beckett over lunch. We talked about her daughter's soccer tournament and the construction on Independence Boulevard, and the fact that the office coffee had gotten measurably worse since they switched suppliers. It was only when we were walking back that she said quietly, without looking at me, "You should request a copy of your personnel file. You're entitled to it. HR is required to provide it within 5 business days." That was all she said. I submitted the request that afternoon. What came back 4 days later was illuminating. Not because of what was in my file, though the number of undocumented performance concerns that had somehow been added retroactively was its own special kind of infuriating, but because of a single email thread that had been accidentally included in the packet. A thread between Beckett and my supervisor dated 6 weeks after his arrival, with the subject line, "Reese and Claire situation." In it, Beckett wrote, "She asks too many questions. She needs to go before Q4, make it clean." My supervisor replied, "Understood. I'll handle the review cycle." I read that email sitting in my car in the parking garage, engine off, the concrete walls pressing in. I read it 4 times, and then I did something I hadn't done in 11 months of working in that building. I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. He always picks up on the second ring for me. He says the first ring is for composure, the second is for presence. I used to think that was pretentious. That afternoon I found it comforting. "Dad," I said, "we have a problem. The thing about my father is that he does not panic. I have watched him receive bad news my entire life. A contractor gone bankrupt, a property deal collapsed at closing. The year a flood took out 2 of his Charlotte buildings, and he stood in 6 inches of water and started making phone calls. He has never once, in my memory, raised his voice in a crisis. So when I told him everything, Beckett's arrival, the false review, the email, the slow erasure of my work, he listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that I started to wonder if the call had dropped. Then he said, "How long has this been going on?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. Another pause. "And you didn't call me." It wasn't an accusation. It was something quieter than that and harder to answer. "I needed to know what I was dealing with first," I said. "You could have been fired." "I know," he exhaled slowly. "Okay. Don't do anything. Don't confront him. Don't send emails. Don't talk to HR on your own. Give me 48 hours, Dad." 48 hours, sweetheart. Trust me. I did not sleep well for 48 hours. I went to work. I sat at my desk. I responded to emails with careful professionalism and attended the 2 meetings I was still being included in, and smiled at people in the hallway like nothing was happening. Beckett walked past my desk on the second day and gave me a look that I can only describe as satisfied, the look of someone who believes the outcome is already decided. I smiled back. I am my father's daughter. On Thursday morning, an all-staff meeting was announced. Mandatory. Executive conference room on the 14th floor, 10 o'clock. No agenda provided. My supervisor found me at my desk at 9:45 and told me, without making eye contact, that I should probably bring my things. "Just in case the meeting runs long and you need to work from home afterward," she said. I knew what that meant. I'd packed a bag the night before, just in case. The 14th floor conference room has floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over uptown Charlotte. On a clear day, you can see all the way to the Cabarrus County line. That morning, the sky was the particular shade of blue that only happens in October. And I stood at the window for a moment before anyone else arrived and thought about how my father used to point to this building when I was small, driving past it on the way to my grandmother's house, and say, "That's ours. Remember that." I remembered. The room filled quickly, 50, maybe 60 people, senior staff, department heads, analysts like me who had no idea what was happening. Beckett came in last, which I assumed was deliberate. He stood at the head of the table with the easy confidence of a man who has never once questioned whether he belongs in a room. He started speaking, something about the company's future direction, the importance of decisive leadership, the need to build a team that reflected the vision of the Caldwell family. He used the phrase, "my father's legacy," twice in the first 3 minutes, and then the door opened. My father doesn't make dramatic entrances. He's not that kind of man. He walked in quietly, said good morning to the room, and took a seat near the back like he'd simply stopped by. But the room went still in the way that rooms go still when the actual authority in a situation becomes visible. Beckett stopped mid-sentence. "Please," my father said pleasantly, "don't let me interrupt." But of course he already had. What happened in the next 20 minutes, I have replayed in my memory more times than I can count. And it still doesn't feel entirely real. My father introduced himself, as if anyone needed introduction. And then, with the patience of someone who has built an empire one careful decision at a time, he asked Beckett a series of questions. About the company's founding, about the original Charlotte properties, about the CFO's name and the lake and the annual spring retreat. Beckett got quieter with each question. The confidence drained slowly, like air from a tire, and what was left underneath wasn't anger or defiance. It was just a man realizing that the story he had constructed was coming apart in real time, in front of witnesses. "Who are you?" my father finally asked, and his voice was perfectly even, not angry. Genuinely curious, the way you might ask about a stranger who had wandered into your kitchen. And I mean that quite literally. Who are you, and how did you come to be in this building? The story that emerged, with help from an HR investigation that had quietly begun 48 hours earlier, was both more mundane and more stunning than I had expected. Beckett. His real surname turned out to be something entirely different, had worked at a development firm in Atlanta. He had met someone tangentially connected to Caldwell Property Group at an industry conference. He had, over the course of several months, constructed a narrative, a falling out with his father, estrangement, an attempt to prove himself by working anonymously in the family business. He had produced documents, good ones, apparently, good enough to get him through an initial round of informal conversations. He had counted on the fact that most of my father's senior staff had never actually met the family up close. He was right about that. He had simply not counted on me. My supervisor was put on administrative leave that afternoon. 2 other members of the department, who had assisted in building the false performance documentation, were asked to meet with HR. I was told, by the company's head of HR, that I would receive a written apology, a correction to my personnel file, and reimbursement for anything I had been wrongly assessed during the review cycle. I thanked her, and then I went to find Phyllis. She was at her desk outside what had been Beckett's temporary office, which was already in the process of being cleared. I didn't have a speech prepared. I just told her that I knew she'd taken a risk in pointing me toward the personnel file, and that it had mattered. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "I know who you are. I've known since about your 3rd week. You have your father's way of listening." I didn't know what to say to that. "He talks about you," she said simply. "Has for years. We all knew he had a daughter. We just didn't know she'd been sitting 30 feet from us for nearly a year. I thought I was going to hold it together. I was wrong about that." She handed me a tissue from the box she kept in her desk drawer, which told me she'd been expecting this moment, and I laughed a little through the worst of it. And she patted my hand once and then went back to sorting files. Because she is fundamentally a practical person, and I respect that about her. My father and I had dinner that night, at a place in the South End that he'd been going to since before I was born. Booth in the back, same table he always requests, a waitress who called him by his first name and brought his usual without asking. He ordered for both of us because he knows what I like, even after years of distance and complications and Tuesday dinners that got rescheduled and then rescheduled again. I told him I was sorry I hadn't called sooner. He told me I had nothing to apologize for. I told him that wasn't true, and we sat with that for a moment, and then he said, You handled yourself exactly the way I would have. Better, honestly. I would have been angrier. You were angry, I said. I could hear it. He smiled. You could? You got very still. You always get still when you're angry. He looked at me across the table, and there was something in his face that I hadn't seen in a long time. Something that might have been relief. I've been waiting 11 months to have dinner with my daughter, he said. That's not a guilt trip. It's just the truth. I know, I said. Me too. We talked for 3 hours. About the company, about what comes next, about what it means for me to stop pretending I don't know what I know and start actually building something. He didn't make any announcements or formal declarations. He's not sentimental that way. But before we left, he picked up the check, as he always does, and said, Next month I want you in the room for the quarterly board meeting. Not as badge number 147. As my daughter. I thought about 11 months of granola bars over the sink and performance reviews written by people who wanted me gone and walking past that building as a child with my face pressed to the car window. Okay, I said. I'll be there. There's one more thing I want to tell you, because I think about it whenever I'm tempted to summarize this whole experience as a tidy story about justice and inheritance. My best friend, the one I called from the kitchen floor the night I got the false review. Her mother had been in and out of the hospital for most of that year. Nothing catastrophic, but the kind of slow-moving medical situation that eats your savings quietly, month by month, the way water wears down stone. She had mentioned it once, briefly, because that's how she is. She doesn't ask for things. A week after everything came out at Caldwell, I sat down with her at her kitchen table. Not a restaurant, not somewhere fancy, just her kitchen, with the same slightly broken chair she'd had since college, and the herb garden on her windows that was mostly parsley, and I told her I wanted to help with her mom's medical bills. Not all at once, not as a grand gesture, just quietly over time, in whatever way was actually useful. She started to argue. I cut her off. You told me to request my personnel file, I said. You told me exactly what to do when I didn't know what I was looking at. So this isn't charity, this is me paying back a debt. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, Next time just ask me directly. I'm not good at accepting things sideways. So I said, directly, will you let me help with your mom's medical bills? And she said, yes. That felt more like justice to me than anything that happened in a boardroom. I still eat granola bars over the sink sometimes. Some habits are hard to break. But now when I walk through those glass doors in the morning and show my badge to the security desk, I don't think about the number on it anymore. I think about my father at a Panera parking lot, telling me I'd always wonder if I hadn't earned it myself. I earned it. I know that now, and so does everyone else.